Hey, Andy here. It's October 6th, 2023, and I just returned from a fly fishing trip to Central PA, primarily fishing Penns Creek. Kind of ran into some very interesting conditions that led to some fantastic fly fishing for a couple of days. We saw probably the most intense, heavy antfall that I've ever seen, and I fish Penns Creek every year for over 50 years now. I want to talk about that antfall, not only that, but the conditions that led up to that and how the trout responded, and then how we took advantage of that activity. And it's not exactly what you would expect, but as a result, it is in some really great fly fishing, a few really big trout, and just a fine time up there. I'll try to talk about the conditions that led up to that, the weather, the trout behavior, what they're doing this time of year, the water levels, and then the behavior of and activity of insects in response to those, and then how that led to the fantastic fly fishing. So with that, we'll get into it and we'll talk at the other end. In a normal year, fall can be characterized by a few things: cool, dry air, high pressure, and low water. Trout streams can be a quarter or less of their springtime levels. This causes the trout to be skittish. After all, they're hiding from predators such as mink, eagle, herons, and ospreys. This forces trout to sometimes hide under rocks and travel by night. And despite the dangers, trout are preparing for the spawning season. With all these conditions, fly fishing can be very good if certain tactics are applied. This year was very different, however. Throughout the later part of the summer, regular shots of rain have kept water levels up. And most recently, Hurricane Ophelia has provided a shot of needed rain and not too much rain. And Ophelia stalled off the coast and produced over 10 days of cool, cloudy, drizzly weather, while New York City was drowning in torrential rains. Fortunately, Central PA was given just the right amount of rain to bring the stream levels up to springtime levels. But things were about to change. The cold damp would give way to warm, sunny, almost summer-like conditions. So on the first day of the trip, I was running late as usual, and my buddy was already on the stream by 10:30 in the morning. I finally arrived about 12:30 in the afternoon, and I started to fish a section of stream downstream from where I parked. My buddy was on the upstream section, and I decided just to leave him that section and then meet him up later. So every once in a while, I would call him, and he would say, "I've got 8 trout." And then a few minutes later, he would say, "I've got 14 trout." And a few minutes after that, he would say, "I've got 18 trout." And meanwhile, I was fishing a riffle section, and I was getting a couple of rises to very small, diminutive little brown trout. So I decided to walk up to where he was and to observe what he was doing. So as I moved upstream, I positioned myself on the bank opposite of where my buddy was fishing. He was casting towards the bank, and I was trying to find out what he was doing. And there, right in front of me, about 2 or 3 feet from the bank, was a pod of very large brown trout. And they were feeding on the surface, in the clear water, but on the shady side. And my buddy was in the middle of the stream, casting towards the edge of the river. And so I realized what was happening. These trout had positioned themselves in this slow water, together in groups, associating with each other, and my buddy was moving up through the middle of the stream in the slow section and targeting these trout. And he was fishing with inchworms and parachute Adams, and he had caught numerous trout, either targeting them or fishing directly to trout that were rising. So before I go on, I have to say that my buddy is an old friend who I taught to fly fish nearly 25 years ago at a fly fishing school that I taught for the Valley Forge chapter of Trout Unlimited. And this friend of mine has not only become a good fly fisherman, but he's become a master. And I was witnessing in front of my eyes the product of his dedication to fly fishing and the amazing technique he used to catch these trout. In the end, this day, as we sat there, as I sat on the bank, my friend hooked and released 22 trout within a few hours of fishing. The skill was there, but at the same time, he was in the right place at the right time. Something was happening here that caused this, and I want to talk about that in more detail. So I entered the river upstream from where my friend was fishing to try to understand what was going on. And what I found was that an ant fall had started to occur in the pool that my friend was fishing in. And so I immediately tied on a fly which approximates an ant basically in size and shape. It was actually a 18 blueing olive, but it looked good enough to me. I put it on and I promptly hooked a 14 or 15 inch wild brown trout off the bank. And I realized what was going on. So the sudden sun and warmer temperatures after 10 days of cool, drizzly, inclement weather had prompted an emergence of ants and then a subsequent ant fall. And the ants were starting to fall into the river. And this prompted the trout to feed. And as it is this time of year, while trout will feed, they're not very selective. So once they get rising to something, such as ants, they're receptive to other flies as well. And the other aspect of this is the water level was higher, the trout were on the move, positioning for spawning, and starting to associate with each other. So these trout were in pods. They're hanging out together. And it was a great opportunity to my buddy to find them, target them, and put flies over them. And because the trout are not selective at this time of year, at least nearly not as much as they are in other times of the year, his combination of a parachute Adams and an inchworm was effective. So trout that were rising to ants and a few bluing olives were also effective to inchworms. And as long as he got that fly in a good position, didn't spook the trout, he had a good chance of catching them. So we left the stream at about 3:30 p.m. and made our way through the valley and up into the mountains on our way to Penns Creek. And on that trip, I was thinking about how the day had gone, how I'd been late, and how I'd missed the best fishing of the day. But I was also thinking about what I had learned when I was on the stream we were fishing and what I had observed and how my friend had taken advantage of a situation and caught so many fish. And I was thinking about how conditions would be at Penns Creek. What would we find there? How would fishing be there? Would we see a similar situation? And when we got there, and we traveled back down into the no-kill stretch where we normally fish, I turned to my friend and I said, I think we're going to have a really great ant fall in Penns Creek. And he nodded and we kept going. And when we got down into the water to the pool we were going to fish, we found that ant fall. And it was amazing. Here's a really nice ant fall happening right now in Penns. And it's the 30th of September. We had probably 7 days of cloudy, cool weather with a tropical system that hung around and then just an easterly flow. Today's the first day the sun came out. And that's when you want to look for an ant fall, because those guys are ready to go. And they go up in the air in the afternoon and they drop wherever they are. And the unlucky ones drop into the water like this. And the pool here is just covered with ants. This is one of the nicest ant falls I've ever seen here on Penns. And there's some fish rising. I think there's a lot of chumps right now in front of us. A few older guys up there, and my buddy and I are fishing down in little bit further. So this truly was the best antfall I've ever seen in 50 years of fishing Penns Creek. The water surface was literally covered from bank to bank. And all that mass was moving downstream. And we were starting to get fish rising. There were some trout rising, lots of chubs, some smallmouth bass. And we were getting ready to try to take advantage of this situation. But instead of putting an ant on, which is something that you would think you would do in this situation, we did something different. We kept the flies on we had when we were fishing the other stream, which was parachute Adams and an inchworm, and we started fishing that way. And what we found fairly quickly was that these trout, although they were rising to ants, would take the parachute Adams and the inchworm as well. And we started to get into some really nice fish. In a side channel, the Penns, and there's a major antfall happening down or up in the big pool above, which I showed you earlier. And my buddy and I got a couple. Got one at 18. He got maybe 3. Biggest one 16. And we're throwing inchworms to anting trout. So many ants on the water, and they're taking them. They're taking the inchworms. There's one down here, right over here. And I'm going to work my way up. There's some chubs. I see chubs in here as well. Kind of a neat spot here. Pretty nice trout here. Just took a parachute Adams. Was anting a minute ago. There's about 15. Beautiful fish. Right off that spot there. Nice fish. Look at this fish. Beautiful. There you go, dude. Nice fish. On Penns Creek, there's been an antfall all afternoon, and we've been fishing inchworms to fish rising to ants, and this is the result. He's easily 18.
It's a fat fish.
Yeah, beautiful fish.
Yeah.
So when I say fish inchworms to rising trout, this is the result. Beautiful.
Okay. We're gonna let him go.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
See, I think these guys are positioning for spawning. That's what they're doing around.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There he goes. See how well he blends in. My goodness. So the next day of our trip dawned clear and bright. And not only was it clear and bright, but it became very warm very quickly. The water stayed cold, but the air temperature rose, and leaves started to come down into the river. Very different conditions from the day before. We stuck to the pattern we had, and we fished primarily parachute Adams and inchworms. But in this situation, we favored sections of the river where there was shade and where there was deeper water under overhanging branches. And we consistently kept to this tactic for most of the afternoon, and we came up with some very nice trout, and I want to talk about that in a minute. So basically, we're covering the water, we're in the sunny areas of the stream, and we're fishing into the shade in these sections of the river that are just positioned just right, such that you can get a fly in there, drop it in a couple inches from the bank, and where the trout are laying. So we focused on the larger pools and pools where there was a good amount of shade based on the orientation of the pool with the sunlight. And we worked from the bottom to the top, trying to get the inchworm down under the branches as close to the bank as possible under the shade. And we were very systematic about that. And that tactic worked, and we started to take fish. I've used this tactic of throwing an inchworm and a parachute Adams underneath the overhanging branches for well over 30 years. When you do this, eventually you're going to run into some big fish. And this day, I was very lucky to catch one of the nicest wild brown trout I've ever caught in Penns Creek. Certainly the nicest trout I've caught in an inchworm. And it was a big fish, and it took me for a ride in this pool. Eventually I did land the fish. And man, was that one beautiful fish. So I just caught one of the finest trout I've caught on Penns Creek in over 50 years of fishing right here. And this guy is probably a 20-incher right here. I gotta measure him, but took an inchworm about 2 inches from the bank up in this pool here. And right back over there. Second fish of the day, and one of the finest, again, trout I've ever caught here in Penns Creek. Gorgeous spawning colors. Fought like crazy. Very good condition for a fish. It's hard to see you go. You're so darn beautiful, but I'm going to let you go now. Thank you for being a trout. Thank you for grabbing my fly and letting yourself be landed and gracing your wonderful presence here in this gorgeous October 1st. Again, one of the best and most beautiful browns I've ever caught on Penns Creek. There he goes. See you, guy. Wow. I caught that 20-inch brown right over on that bank, maybe about 3 or 4 inches from the bank. And just dropping a tandem parachute Adams and an inchworm. And we're working from the bottom to the top of the pool. My buddy's up there, you can see him. And trying to get those inchworms to drop in as though there were naturals coming off of the trees. I took one trout about 12 and then this big fish. And squarely hooked in the jaw, beautiful, fought like crazy, and thank God I landed him. And took a picture of him. But when you're fishing like this with inchworms at this time of year, try to pick a pool that is in a certain time of day. Hopefully afternoon is shaded halfway. Sometimes if the bank is towards the south or southwest, because this time of year the sun kind of arcs along the southern horizon a bit before going down, and these shadows show up, and where you have a good canopy on the edge, overhanging trees, and a very steep, deep bank there goes straight down, and there's some deep water. And some of these fish just lay in there. Sometimes they're feeding and sometimes just laying in there and just waiting for something to come in. I didn't see that fish. I was fishing the water, and every 3 or 4 feet, oops, there goes a walnut, just dropping that inchworm in. It gets very deep. I had to go in kind of deep to get over there. Sometimes you can pick up a lot of fish this way. Other times you just pick a few, but they can be some quality fish. One strategy for fishing inchworms in the fall. Give it a try. So despite the bright conditions, we managed to locate trout underneath the branches and target them using a combination of inchworms and parachute Adams. We left for the afternoon to take a rest and eventually made our way back to the stream in the evening to fish again. And what we found was a river that had come alive. It seems that the ant fall the previous night had prompted the trout into a feeding frenzy. And the warm temperatures brought caddisflies and mayfly duns and mayfly spinners and more ants into the water. And we had a fantastic evening targeting trout that were rising, casting inchworms and parachute Adams, and having those trout take those inchworms at depth. It didn't matter. If they were rising, there was a good chance they were going to take the inchworms. So if this all sounds all too simple, well, it is. It's very simple. Nice. It's a simple approach. It's been very effective for many years. And it's not that hard to do. So I would encourage anybody who's out there to try what we do, which is stick to a couple flies, target trout that are rising, target trout that are underneath the trees on the edge of the bank in the shade, and I can almost guarantee you're going to catch some fish. So on the third day, we traveled back to the river to fish the evening. This time my son was able to join us. However, conditions at the river had changed dramatically. The fly activity was less, the air temperatures were near summertime levels, and the fishing was slow. We did manage to catch some fish, and more importantly, we spent some time together and enjoyed the beauty around the stream. But it was obvious that the window of opportunity we had, and we matched and met, had closed, and fishing from then on was going to be very different. I hope you enjoyed this video. I appreciate your time, and I hope you find something in here that is of value to you. I'll leave you with some of the learnings and observations I've had from my many years fly fishing in central Pennsylvania, particularly in the fall and in conditions similar to the ones that I just experienced. I hope you're able to get out on the stream, enjoy your time out there, and I guarantee if you use some of these methods, you're going to catch some trout. This year has been a hard year. The demands of a stressful career, the ever-present financial pressures, and the responsibility to my family's health and well-being have taken their toll. It may sound like it, but I am not complaining. I have accepted the fact that life is hard, that parenting is lifelong, that relationships require work, that there will never be enough money, to expect challenges, that loved ones will eventually go away. By accepting that life is hard and that problems are meant to be solved, I've gained a measure of peace of mind. I've learned that applying hard work and a measure of love solves most of life's problems. Love is a verb after all. And to underscore this difficult year, my own very real, very close brush with death has reminded me that my time on earth is fleeting. I am thankful for a strong recovery and hopeful for a long and rewarding remainder of my life. So, my return to experience another fall in this great river feels like a gift. And more importantly, I was lucky to share some of this recovery time with a great friend and my own beloved son. We spent a few glorious days of fly fishing for wild trout, taking rigorous hikes, eating great food, and having long, meaningful conversations. But today, I was left alone again with the river and my own thoughts. In this quiet, rarefied version of reality, the trees, abandoned again by the summer birds, with their vibrant leaves falling, speak of the urgency of time and change. The living stream itself celebrates the joyful last golden days before the return of winter's cold and darkness. And the unending tug of the current reveals the pure, universal energy that drives everything. Today, as I stand by myself in this bright river, a river of life, I'm imagining it saying, never stop, never give up, just keep going.